Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was first real quirk user. He has an immortal quirk, been around since WW1. After he turned 15 he stopped aging, was many things, fought in the military, was vigilante in the early quirk days, later became a pro hero, even friends with every OFA user, and was a UA teacher since its foundation. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The late afternoon sun, the color of weak tea, slanted through the towering, reinforced windows of classroom 1A. It cast long, distorted shadows that stretched from desk to desk, making the cavernous room feel both immense and intimate. For most students, the final period of the day, heroic history ethics, was a cool-down. It was a class devoid of explosions, physical exertion, or the high-stakes pressure of combat training. It was a class of theory and stories, and its teacher was the biggest story of all. Mr. Izuku Midoriya stood at the podium, not behind it. He had a habit of pacing slowly before the class, his posture relaxed but never slouched, his presence a quiet anchor in the room. He looked, by all accounts, unremarkable. He appeared to be a man in his late 20s or early 30s, with a spray of freckles across his cheeks that seemed almost boyish. His hair was a chaotic mop of dark green, a stark contrast to the profound, unnerving stillness in his emerald eyes. Those eyes were the first clue that something about him was off. They held a depth that didn't belong on a face so young, a weariness that spoke not of a sleepless night, but of a sleepless century. He wore simple, practical clothing, dark trousers, a crisp white button-up with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a loose-fitting black tie. There were faint, silvery scars that traced the back of his hands and disappeared under his cuffs, a thin, white line that bisected his left eyebrow, and a barely there stiffness in his left leg that gave him a nearly imperceptible limp. The students had, in their own ways, catalogued these oddities. Kaminari figured he was an ex-underground hero who'd seen too much. Ashido whispered he was secretly a vampire. Bakugo, uncharacteristically, said nothing at all, but watched their teacher with a simmering, analytical intensity. The period between the first quirk manifestation, the luminescent baby in Xingqing, and the establishment of the Hero Public Safety Commission was known as the Turbulent Era or the Wild West of Quirks, Izuku said, his voice calm and melodic, a stark contrast to the violent history he described. It was a voice that commanded attention without ever needing to be raised. It is a sanitized term for what was, in effect, a slow-motion collapse of global society. He gestured to the holoscreen behind him, which displayed grainy, black and white photographs of riots, of cities half demolished not by bombs, but by the uncontrolled, terrified outbursts of early quirk users. Imagine it, he continued, his eyes unfocused, gazing at a point somewhere beyond the back wall of the classroom. One day, your neighbor can breathe fire, but he can't turn it off. The postman accidentally teleports into a bank vault. A child throws a tantrum and the street cracks in half. There was no law for this. No precedent. There was only fear. The class was quiet. Even Kaminari, who often used this period for a light nap, was sitting up, captivated. Mr. Midoriya didn't teach history like a series of dates and names. He taught it like a memory. The governments of the world reacted as they always do to things they don't understand. With force, Izuku's tone became a fraction colder. Quirk suppression units were formed. People were detained, experimented on, or simply disappeared. It wasn't about good or evil. It was about order versus chaos. And in that environment, the first heroes were born. They weren't called heroes, of course. They were vigilantes. Outlaws. Freaks fighting other freaks. He stopped his pacing and turned to face them fully, his gaze sweeping over the students. He saw their eager, naive faces, their raw potential, and a deep, ancient ache settled in his chest. They were so new. He had seen generations just like them rise and fall. It was Mina Ashido, ever curious and irrepressible, who broke the silence. But what about them, sensei? The first vigilantes? We always hear about the first official heroes, but what were the real first ones like? The ones who were out there when it was total chaos. A hush fell over the room. It was the question they all had. The history books were vague, filled with legends and myths about figures like the Argent Star or Captain Courageous, clearly pro-hero propaganda names created after the fact. Izuku's shoulders seemed to slump by a millimeter, an infinitesimal shift that only a keen observer would notice. A shadow passed over his features, a profound sadness that aged him 30 years in an instant. He looked down at his hands, at the faint scars there, before looking back up at Mina. They were not like the heroes of today, he said softly. There were no flashy costumes. No merchandise. No rankings. For most, there wasn't even a name. There was only a goal, to keep one more person from dying. To hold a small piece of the world together for one more night. He began to pace again, his mind slipping back through the roaring currents of time. I remember the stories about one of the earliest in Japan. They called him the Green Ghost of Sapporo. This was a time when the city was carved into territories by powerful, predatory quirk users. Gangs, really? One controlled the port, another the food distribution. The police were outgunned and terrified. His voice took on a narrative quality, his words painting a picture so vivid the students could almost smell the winter air and the smoke. The ghost never spoke. He wore simple, dark green fatigues, surplus from one of the post-quirk border skirmishes. His face was always covered by a gas mask and hood. Practical, not theatrical. His quirk wasn't flashy. No explosions or super strength. The rumors said he just couldn't be put down. People saw him get shot, stabbed, thrown from buildings. He always got back up. Shoto Todoroki leaned forward ever so slightly, his mismatched eyes fixed on Izuku. He recognized the description of a durability or regeneration quirk, but the way Mr. Midoriya spoke of it was different. He didn't fight to be a symbol, Izuku continued, his voice barely above a whisper. He fought like a surgeon cutting out a cancer. He would appear in a gang's territory, and he would systematically, brutally, and efficiently dismantle their power structure. He didn't kill. That was his one, unbreakable rule. But he would break bones, he would cripple. He would instill a fear far greater than the fear of death, the fear of absolute, inescapable consequence. He'd leave the ringleaders broken and bound for the overwhelmed police to collect. Then he would vanish, moving on to the next territory. Izuku paused, his gaze landing on Katsuki Bakugo. He wasn't strong because he had the most powerful quirk. He was strong because he had absolute focus and an unshakable purpose. His power was a tool, nothing more. He understood that true strength isn't the ability to destroy. It's the will to endure. To keep standing when everything and everyone is trying to knock you down. The room was utterly silent. The students were no longer listening to a history lesson. They were listening to a ghost story, and the storyteller seemed to be speaking from personal experience. The air was thick with the unsaid. At that moment, the classroom door slid open with a soft shush. Shoto Aizawa, their homeroom teacher, stood there, wrapped in his customary bandages like a modern mummy. His tired, bloodshot eyes scanned the room before landing on Izuku. He didn't speak. He simply leaned against the doorframe, observing. Izuku met his gaze. For a fleeting second, an entire conversation passed between them. It was a look of shared understanding, of a long-held, unspoken agreement. Aizawa knew Izuku wasn't just a history teacher. He didn't know the full story, no one alive did, anymore. But he knew Izuku was UA's oldest and most formidable secret. He was the final line of defense, a living relic Nizu had built the very school around. Aizawa's presence was a quiet check-in, a silent question, everything alright? Izuku gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Just teaching. Aizawa's gaze softened for a fraction of a second before his usual apathy returned. He turned his attention to the students. Don't let his stories make you romanticize vigilantism, he grumbled, his voice a low rasp. The only reason people like the Green Ghost existed is because the system had failed. Our job is to make sure it never fails that badly again. The paperwork alone would be a nightmare. The tension broke. A few students chuckled. Ida, who had been transcribing Izuku's every word with frantic precision, looked torn between reverence for a historical figure and abject horror at the flagrant disregard for the law. The bell shrieked, a jarring, modern sound that shattered the historical reverie. The students blinked, shaking off the spell, and the usual end-of-day chaos began as they packed their bags. That's all for today, Izuku said, his voice back to its normal, pleasant tone. For next time, read pages 50 through 65 on the Hero Vigilante Accords. And Mr. Bakugo, a word, if you please. The class filed out, chattering about the mysterious vigilante. Bakugo slung his bag over his shoulder with aggressive nonchalance, and stomped towards the podium, a scowl fixed on his face. "What do you want, Teach?" he snarled. Izuku waited until the last student had left. Aizawa remained by the door, a silent sentinel. "You were listening today," Izuku stated simply. It wasn't a question. "So what?" "It was less boring than the usual crap," Bakugo shot back, refusing to meet his eyes. "That absolute focus I mentioned," Izuku said, his voice low and serious. "You have it. That drive. I've seen it before. In geniuses, in monsters, and in the greatest of heroes. It is a fire that can forge a new world or burn the old one to ash. Be careful which one you choose." Bakugo's jaw tightened. He hated being psychoanalyzed. He hated the way Mr. Midoriya looked at him, not like a problem child, but like a complex equation he had already solved. "Whatever, old man," he muttered, turning and stalking out of the room without another word. Izuku watched him go, a flicker of something ancient and sad in his eyes. He saw the boy's immense power, his rage, his ambition. It was a combination he'd seen before, and it had rarely ended well. "He's a handful," Aizawa said, finally stepping into the room. "He's a loaded cannon," Izuku corrected softly. "And someone has lit the fuse. We just need to make sure he's pointed in the right direction when he finally goes off." He gathered his datapad from the podium. "How is Toshinori?" "Same as always," Aizawa grunted, putting on a brave face. "Pushing himself too hard. He's in the staff room." "I'll go see him," Izuku said. He walked past Aizawa, placing a hand briefly on his friend's shoulder. The gesture was fleeting, but Aizawa felt the strange, grounding weight of it. It felt like being reassured by a mountain. "Thanks, Shota." The walk from the 1A classroom to the main faculty lounge was a journey through time. The hallways of UA were a museum of heroism, the walls lined with portraits of top-ranking pros and distinguished alumni. To the students, they were legends. To Izuku, they were colleagues, pupils, friends, and ghosts. He passed a portrait of the waterjet hero, Manuel, and remembered a determined young man who had interned under him decades ago. He saw a picture of the recently retired Crimson Riot, and recalled their shared patrols in the lawless districts of Narahata, long before it was a gentrified tourist spot. With each step, the persona of Mr. Midoriya dissolved, and the true weight of his existence settled back upon his shoulders. He was Izuku, the sentinel, the man who remembered the silence before the quirks, the chaos of their birth, and the long, bloody struggle to build the world these children now took for granted. The staff room was buzzing with the low-energy hum of the end of a long day. President Mike was recapping a particularly loud English lesson to a stoic Cementas, while Midnight proofread student essays with a theatrical sigh. But Izuku's eyes sought out the corner of the room, by the large window overlooking the main gate. There sat a man who was more skeleton than human. Toshinori Yagi, in his true form, looked like a candle that had been left to burn down to a nub. His blonde hair, once a proud, defiant symbol, was now limp and thin. He was hunched over, a handkerchief pressed to his lips to stifle a wet, racking cough. The crisp suit he wore hung off his emaciated frame. Izuku approached quietly, grabbing 2 mugs from the coffee station. He poured 1 black coffee for himself and a cup of warm, decaffeinated tea for his friend. He placed the tea on the table in front of Toshinori, who looked up with a grateful, weary smile. "Izuku," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "How was the class?" "Full of potential," Izuku replied, taking the seat opposite him. "And questions? Let me guess. The turbulent era?" Toshinori sighed, taking a sip of tea. "You always did have a knack for making history sound like you were there." A small, wry smile touched Izuku's lips. "A gift." He watched his friend for a moment. The steam from the tea swirled around Toshinori's gaunt face, making him look even more spectral. "You're pushing it, Toshi. The foundational heroics class. The one-on-one training. You need to conserve what you have left." Toshinori waved a dismissive hand, which ended in another coughing fit. "I have to. All for One is out there. Shigaraki is his new weapon. I don't have time to rest. I need to prepare them. I need to guide young Bakugo, or perhaps young Todoroki. I still don't know who is worthy of. He trailed off, the weight of his legacy, of one for all, pressing down on him. Izuku's expression was one of profound empathy. He had had this conversation before. 7 times, with 7 different people. He had sat with Yoichi, the first, as he wasted away, terrified for the world his brother was creating. He had advised the second user, a grim soldier like himself, on how to fight a war on 2 fronts. He had trained Nana Shimura, had seen the boundless hope in her eyes, a hope he had tried so hard to protect. And now he sat with the 8th, the greatest of them all, as his light began to fade. The children are strong, Toshi, Izuku said, his voice a low, steady baritone. Stronger than you think. Uraraka has a will of iron beneath that sunny exterior. Ida's integrity is a shield in itself. Todoroki is beginning to understand that his power is his own. And Bakugo. Bakugo has the drive of a tempest. They will be ready. But will they be ready in time? Tashinori whispered, looking out the window at the setting sun. The light was fading fast, mirroring the embers of one for all within him. My time as a symbol is almost over. I can feel it. When I'm gone, the fear will return. The vultures will circle. He groomed Shigaraki to be a symbol of terror to counteract my symbol of peace. When I fall, chaos will answer. Izuku reached across the table and placed his hand on Tashinori's thin, bony shoulder. His touch was firm, warm, and impossibly solid. It was the touch of someone who had stood his ground against the erosion of ages. Listen to me, Tashinori, he said, his green eyes locking onto his friend's blue ones. I was there when the world broke the first time. I watched cities burn and I saw hope reduced to a whisper in a dark alley. I saw the rise of your nemesis when he was just a man with a hungry, terrible quirk. I stood with every one of your predecessors as they fought and died to keep that whisper of hope alive. He squeezed Tashinori's shoulder gently. The weariness in his own eyes was a vast, deep ocean, but on its surface was a steely, unbreakable resolve. We have weathered worse, Toshi. You and I. We weathered the fall of Nana. We weathered your first fight with him, the one that cost you your stomach. We will weather this. Your light may fade, but it will not be extinguished. It will live on in them. He gestured vaguely in the direction of the dorms. And I will be here to tend the flame. I always have been. Tashinori's breath hitched. He leaned into Izuku's touch, the solid presence a comfort against the trembling of his own failing body. For all his power, for all his fame as All Might, here, in this quiet moment, he was just a dying man, and Izuku was his oldest, truest friend, the only person alive who knew the entire, crushing weight of the burden he carried. Thank you, Izuku, he breathed. There's nothing to thank me for, Izuku said, retracting his hand. We're soldiers in the same long war. We don't get to quit. He took a slow sip of his black coffee. It was bitter and harsh, but it was real. Grounding. He needed that. He needed to focus on the now, on the tangible, to keep the flood of 150 years of memories at bay. He had promises to keep. A promise to Nana to watch over her legacy. A promise to the first user to see this through to the end. Suddenly, their quiet moment was shattered. A sound cut through the building. It wasn't the familiar, almost musical chime of the standard fire or evacuation drill. This was a raw, grating, metallic shriek. A klaxon, brutal and insistent, that spoke of only one thing, an active, high-level breach. Red lights flashed in the hallway, bathing the staff room in an apocalyptic glow. Code Scarlet. Level 3 intrusion. Unforeseen simulation Japetium. USJ. 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 The atmosphere in the room changed in a nanosecond. Present Mike was on his feet, his playful demeanor gone, replaced by a razor's edge. Midnight's flirty persona vanished, her eyes sharp and predatory. Cementos rose, his face a grim slab of concrete. USJ? But that's where 13 and Aizawa are with the first years. Present Mike yelled over the din. Tashinori surged to his feet, a flicker of his all-might form trying to manifest. The children! He gasped, but a violent cough bent him double, a spray of blood speckling his handkerchief. He was in no condition to fight. In the midst of the controlled panic, Izuku Midoriya was an island of absolute calm. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't gasped. As the alarm blared, the warm, empathetic friend who had just been comforting Toshinori vanished. The kind, enigmatic teacher was gone. In his place stood something else, something older and far more dangerous. His face became a neutral, grim mask. The weariness in his eyes was burned away by a cold, hard fire, the familiar look of a soldier who has just heard the call to arms. His posture, already straight, became ramrod perfect. Every line of his body screamed lethal readiness. Without a word, he turned and strode out of the staff room, his movements economical and swift. The other teachers, caught up in their own reactions, barely registered his departure. But Toshinori saw it. He saw the transformation, and a cold dread mixed with a sliver of desperate hope filled him. He knew that look. It was the look Izuku wore in the old photographs, the ones from the vigilante days that he kept locked away. It was the look of the sentinel going to war. Izuku didn't head for the exit. He walked purposefully down the hall to his own office, a small, Spartan room near the faculty archives. The office was as unassuming as he was. A desk, a chair, a computer terminal. On one wall was a meticulously detailed map of Japan, littered with pins of varying colors that marked sites of historical significance only he would understand. On a small shelf sat a few oddities, a tarnished service medal from the Great War, a piece of fused glass from Hiroshima, and a petrified piece of wood from the staff of the third OFA user. He ignored all of it. He walked to a tall, narrow locker in the corner of the room, the kind used for athletic gear. He keyed in a simple code and the door clicked open. Hanging inside was not a flashy hero costume, but a simple, dark green, fire-retardant combat jacket with a high collar and a hood. On the floor of the locker rested the only piece of equipment he ever used. It was a staff. 8 feet of graphite composite alloy, black as a starless night. It was unadorned, lacking any button or gadget. It was scuffed and scarred from a century of use, the grip worn smooth in the exact shape of his hands. It was a simple tool for a simple purpose, breaking things and people without killing them. A relic from an era before heroes needed brand management. He hefted the staff. The weight was familiar, an extension of his own arm. It felt like coming home. He pulled on the jacket, flipped the hood over his green hair, casting his face in shadow. Only the grim set of his jaw and the cold light in his eyes were visible. When he stepped out into a hallway, he ran into Aizawa, who was already sprinting towards the entrance. Aizawa skidded to a halt, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as he took in the sight of his colleague. The friendly history teacher was gone. In his place stood the green ghost of Sapporo, pulled from the pages of history and made terrifyingly real. Midoriya. Aizawa breathed, unsure of what he was even looking at. Izuku's voice was flat, devoid of any emotion save for a cold, sharp-edged determination. Let's go to work, Aizawa. The klaxon shriek was a physical thing, a serrated blade scraping against the inside of Izuku's skull. It was a sound designed for panic, for pure, adrenalized reaction. Around him, his colleagues, friends he had known for years, some for decades, were reacting as they should, their hero instincts kicking in. But for Izuku, the alarm was a time machine. It stripped away the comfortable veneer of Yuehai, the scent of chalk dust and old paper, and hurled him back into the mud and blood of 100 other battlefields. The sound was the same as the air raid sirens over London, the same as the call to general quarters on a pitching naval destroyer, the same as the perimeter breach alarms in the early, fortified settlements of the turbulent era. He moved past Aizawa, the graphite staff held loosely in his right hand, its familiar weight a grounding presence. Aizawa, already pulling his yellow goggles over his eyes, fell into step beside him, his movements a fluid, desperate sprint. They bypassed the main sensors, Aizawa bit out, his voice tight with controlled fury. It had to be a warp quirk. The signal jammer confirms it. They're isolating the USJ completely. He was processing, analyzing, his mind racing to protect his students. His kids, Kurojiiri, Izuku stated, his voice a low, chillingly steady counterpoint to Aizawa's urgency. They were running now, their footsteps echoing in the unnaturally empty main corridor, the flashing red lights painting them in frantic, pulsing strokes. Aizawa shot him a sharp look. Who? The warped quirk user, Izuku elaborated, his eyes fixed on the distant exit. He was running with an unnerving economy of motion, his upper body perfectly still, his legs eating up the ground with a soldier's tireless rhythm. Calls himself Kurogiri. A living gateway. He's the linchpin, their entry, their exit, their battlefield mobility. He's the primary tactical target. Aizawa's mind reeled. How could Midoriya, the quiet, unassuming history teacher, know the name of a villain who hadn't even made his public debut? There was no time to ask. The lives of 20 students were on the line. He mentally filed the question away under the growing pile labeled the Midoriya Enigma and focused on the mission. They burst through the main doors of the UA building. The unforeseen simulation joint facility was a separate, domed structure a few hundred meters across the campus grounds. It seemed impossibly far away. Other teachers were mobilizing behind them, but Izuku and Aizawa were the tip of the spear. Mizu is locking down the school and trying to break the comms jam, Aizawa said, more to himself than to Izuku. All might is depleted. It'll be at least 5 minutes before a proper response team can be mustered. We're on our own until then. 5 minutes is an eternity, Izuku replied, his voice flat. He knew better than anyone what could be lost in 5 seconds, let alone 5 minutes. He shifted his grip on the staff, the worn alloy cool against his skin. He had held this staff while defending the gate of a refugee camp from a pyrokinetic warlord. He had used it to disarm a would-be assassin targeting the 4th OFA user. It had been his constant companion through the slow, painful birth of the hero age. Now, it would taste battle once more on the manicured grounds of the very institution he had helped to found. They reached the massive doors of the USJ. They were slightly ajar. A sign of forced entry, or an invitation? It didn't matter. Aizawa didn't hesitate, shoving the door open and plunging inside. Izuku was half a step behind him, a dark green shadow. The sight that greeted them was one of orchestrated chaos. From their vantage point at the top of a massive flight of stairs, they had a panoramic view of the battlefield. The vast dome of the USJ, with its various disaster zones, the shipwreck, the landslide, the conflagration, was teeming with villains. Not just a handful, but dozens. A small army of thugs and low-level criminals, their faces twisted with manic glee, swarmed the central plaza, and in the middle of it all stood 2 figures. One was a swirling vortex of purple-black mist with malevolent yellow eyes, Kurogiri, just as Izuku had described. The other was a lanky man-child, his body adorned with dismembered hands, one obscuring his face. He was scratching furiously at his neck, his posture radiating petulant, unstable rage. Tamura Shigaraki. Worse, the students were scattered. Kurogiri had evidently used his quirk to teleport them across the facility, separating them, disorienting them. A small group, including Tsuyu Ajiri and Mineta, were in the shipwreck zone, trying to fend off water-based villains. Another cluster was fighting for their lives in the landslide zone, and at the entrance, 13 was trying to hold the line, protecting the students who hadn't been warped, but Kurogiri was already turning on them. Aizawa's blood ran cold. It was a targeted, well-planned ambush. His eyes, however, locked on the central plaza where, to his horror, he saw a few of his students, Uraraka, Siro, Sato, watching the main villains, frozen in terror. He was about to leap down, to throw himself into the fray as he always did, but Izuku's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. It wasn't a restraining grip, but a steadying one. Wait! Analyze, Izuku commanded, his voice sharp and clear above the distant sounds of fighting. His eyes weren't frantic. They were scanning, processing, dissecting the battlefield with the cold precision of a supercomputer. They separated the students to pick them off one by one, Izuku stated, pointing with his chin. Kurogiri is the shepherd, herding them. Shigaraki, the one with the hands, is the wolf. He's waiting for the main event. He's here for all might. These thugs are just fodder to keep us busy. He turned to Aizawa, his shadowed face intense. You are their primary disruption. You excel at fighting groups. Go to the central plaza. Your presence will draw their attention and sow confusion. Disable as many as you can, but your main objective is to put pressure on Shigaraki and Kurogiri. Force them to focus on you. Buy time for the students in the outer zones to regroup. He then looked toward the entrance, where 13 was preparing to use their quirk. 13. He called out, his voice carrying with surprising force. The space hero turned. Your priority is defense and evacuation. Get the remaining students out of here. Do not engage Kurogiri directly. Your quirk is too dangerous in a chaotic environment. Create a safe zone. Be a shield. 13, startled by the history teacher's sudden command but recognizing the undeniable tactical logic, nodded firmly. Understood. Aizawa stared at Izuku. The commands were perfect. They were exactly what a seasoned battle commander would have ordered. It was a strategy that utilized their strengths, minimized their weaknesses, and focused on the most critical objective, student survival. There was no time for questions, only action. And you? Aizawa asked, pulling his goggles fully into place. Izuku's gaze swept across the dome, a shepherd counting his flock. I'll be the firefighter. I'm going where the flames are highest. With that, Aizawa didn't need another word. He activated his quirk, his long hair floating as the capture weapon unwound from his neck, and launched himself off the stairs, a specter of righteous fury descending upon the unsuspecting villains below. Let the game begin, Aizawa snarled as he landed, his quirk erasing the powers of the first villains he engaged. Izuku watched him go for a split second, a flicker of pride in his eyes. He had helped train a young, hot-headed Shota Aizawa years ago, honing his raw talent into the formidable hero he was today. Then, he turned and sprinted down the stairs, his dark green jacket flapping behind him like the wings of a bird of prey. The students in the shipwreck zone were in trouble. Trapped on a small boat, they were surrounded by villains with aquatic and mutation quirks. Tsuyu Ajiri was doing her best, using her frog-like abilities to snatch villains from the water and knock them back, but they were outnumbered. Mineta was panicking, uselessly throwing his sticky purple balls into the water where they simply floated away. Just as a villain with shark-like features was about to capsize their boat, a black shape arced through the air and slammed into his head with a sickening crack. The villain went limp, sinking beneath the waves. Tsuyu and Mineta looked up in shock. Standing on the shore, staff held at the ready, was Mr. Midoriya. Mr. Midoriya? Tsuyu croaked, her large eyes wide with disbelief. Stay on the boat, Izuku ordered, his voice echoing slightly over the water. Use your friend's quirk to secure it to the deck so you can't be capsized. I'll handle the rest. Before they could respond, he was moving. He wasn't flashy like All Might or brutally efficient like Aizawa. He moved with a purpose that felt geological in its certainty. He waded into the water, his staff a blur. He didn't use grand, sweeping motions. It was all precise jabs, parries, and disabling strikes. A jab to a villain's floating rib. A sharp crack to another's kneecap. He used his staff to hook a man's ankle and send him face first into the water, then used the momentum to spin and block a strike from behind. It was a brutal, elegant ballet of pain, designed for maximum disablement with minimum wasted energy. Within a minute, the water around the boat was filled with groaning, incapacitated villains. He gave Tsuyu a final, curt nod, then turned and ran towards the landslide zone, leaving his students staring in stunned silence. Meanwhile, in the central plaza, Aizawa was a whirlwind of controlled violence. He was magnificent, a one-man army. He erased quirks, and snared villains with his capture weapon, and delivered brutal, disabling kicks and punches. But he was counting the seconds. How long could he keep his quirk active? How long until he blinked? Shigaraki watched from the sidelines, scratching his neck with a manic energy. He's cool, the villain rasped, his voice grating. But he's not All Might. Noma. At his command, the hulking creature that had been standing silently beside him moved. It was a grotesque parody of a man, its body a mass of scarred, dark purple muscle, its brain exposed and pulsating under a clear dome of bone, its eyes vacant, its mouth fixed in a permanent, bird-like beak. The Noma moved with a speed that defied its bulk. One moment it was by Shigaraki's side, the next it was on top of Aizawa. Aizawa's instincts screamed. He erased its quirk, or tried to, but the monster's fists still connected. The blow wasn't just strong, it was unnaturally, absurdly powerful. Aizawa felt his arm shatter. The pain was blinding. He was thrown back, his head slamming against the hard stone of the plaza. He tried to get up, but the Noma was on him, grabbing his head, smashing it into the pavement again and again. The world swam in a haze of red. He could hear Shigaraki laughing. He could hear his students screaming his name. Through a blur of pain and blood, he saw the Noma raise its massive fist for a final, crushing blow. He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry, everyone. Get away from him." The voice was not a shout. It was a cold, hard command, slicing through the chaos. The Noma paused, its fist hovering in the air. Shigaraki turned, his visible eye narrowing with irritation. "Who's this NPC?" Standing not 20 feet away was Izuku. His hood was still up, his face shadowed. His staff was held in a two-handed defensive grip. He had finished his work in the outer zones, converging on the center just as Aizawa fell. Shigaraki tilted his head. "Another teacher? You're not on the schedule." "No matter. Nomu, kill him. Make it fast." The Nomu, an engine of pure destruction, abandoned the broken form of Aizawa and charged at Izuku. The students who had been watching from the plaza entrance, Uraraka, Ida, and the others 13 had been trying to protect, cried out in terror. Tsuyu and Mineta, who had just made it to the edge of the plaza, watched in horror. "Mr. Midoriya, run!" Ida screamed, his voice filled with genuine panic. Izuku did not run. He stood his ground as the mountain of muscle bore down on him. The Noma swung a fist that could pulverize concrete. It was a wild, haymaker-like blow, all power and no finesse. Instead of trying to block it, Izuku moved. At the last possible microsecond, he rotated his body, letting the fist whistle past his ear, the wind of its passage fluttering his hood. He used the Noma's own momentum, his staff shooting out to hook behind the creature's knee. With a sharp tug, he redirected its immense forward momentum, sending the beast stumbling past him. It was a perfect, textbook parry. A masterclass in martial arts. The Nomu, unaccustomed to anything but overpowering its targets, seemed momentarily confused. It recovered and swung again, a backhand strike. This time, Izuku dropped low, the blow sailing over his head. As he rose, he jabbed the end of his staff into the creature's exposed side with incredible force. The staff, which had dented steel and cracked concrete in its time, hit the Noma's flesh with a dull, wet thud. The creature didn't even flinch. It was like striking a mountain made of rubber. Shigaraki cackled. "It's no good, hero. My Noma was created with shock absorption. You can't hurt him." Izuku took a defensive step back, his eyes never leaving the Noma. His mind was racing, analyzing. No reaction to a kinetic strike. All Might's power level would be needed to overwhelm it, but it lacks intelligence. It follows simple commands. Predictable. Shigaraki was getting impatient. "This is boring. Nomu, stop playing with him. Kill the kids watching from the water's edge." His command changed everything. The Noma's vacant eyes swiveled towards Tsuyu and the still recovering Mineta. It ignored Izuku and began to charge towards them. It was in that moment that the century-old soldier completely eclipsed the teacher. There was no calculation, no strategy. There was only the one, unbreakable rule he had lived by since the beginning: protect the innocent. Keep them from dying. He moved. There was no martial artist's grace now, only a desperate, full-tilt sprint. He put himself on an intercept course, his only goal to get between the monster and the children. He was fast. Faster than any normal man. But the Noma was faster. He saw the creature raising its arm to smash down on Tsuyu. He saw the pure, uncomprehending terror in her eyes. He wasn't going to make it, so he did the only thing he could. He launched himself forward, a flying, horizontal dive, and shoved Tsuyu and Mineta with all his might, sending them tumbling into the water with a splash. He had put himself in their place. He had a single, fleeting moment to look up. To see the grotesque, beak-like face of the Noma. To see the massive, scarred fist descending like a meteor. He braced himself, not for impact, but for the pain. The sound was not a crack. It was a wet, sickening, explosive crunch. The students screamed. It was a raw, unified sound of pure horror. Uraraka clapped her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ida stood frozen, unable to process what he had just seen. Bakugo, watching from the ruins of the downpour zone where he'd been teleported, felt a cold knot of something unfamiliar in his gut. Mr. Midoriya had not been thrown back. The Nomu's fist had connected with his torso, and it had not stopped. The creature's arm had punched through him, shattering his spine and ribs, and had continued its arc, ripping his body in two at the waist. His upper torso was flung a dozen feet in one direction, landing in a mangled heap. His legs crumpled to the ground in another. A spray of crimson painted the stone plaza. Silence, a profound, deathly silence fell over the USJ. The low-level thugs stopped fighting. The students stopped breathing. Even the flashing lights of the fire zone seemed to dim. The friendly, enigmatic history teacher was dead. Murdered in the most brutal way imaginable, right in front of his students. Shigaraki let out a long, wheezing cackle that broke the silence. Ha 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 ha. Yes. See? See? This is what happens when weaklings try to play hero. He died for nothing. A meaningless NPC death. Now where was I? Oh right. Killing kids? He gestured for the Nomu to finish the job, but the creature stood still, tilting its head as if confused. Then it started. A faint hissing sound, like steam escaping a high-pressure valve, came from the mangled upper torso of Izuku Midoriya. The students closest to it, paralyzed by shock, saw it first. A thick, white vapor began to rise from the ragged, torn flesh of his waist, and then the flesh began to move. It writhed. Tendons, like red and white snakes, squirmed and stretched across the gap where his hips should have been. Muscle fibers visibly wove themselves together in a gruesome, accelerated tapestry of creation. Splintered fragments of his spine began to glow with a faint green light as they drew themselves back together, audibly snapping into place with a series of sharp, whip-crack sounds. What is that? Shigaraki stammered, his scratching stopping for the first time. His voice had lost its confident glee, replaced by a thread of genuine confusion and fear. The two halves of Izuku's body began to move. The legs, powered by regenerating nerves, stumbled and crawled towards the torso. The torso, using its regenerating arms, dragged itself across the blood-slick stone to meet them. When they touched, the hissing intensified. The two ragged ends of his body fused together in a grotesque, steaming union, the skin knitting itself shut in seconds, leaving behind a network of angry, red scars that were already beginning to fade to silver. With a final, sickening jolt, his reconstructed body spasmed on the ground. Then, Izuku Midoriya got to his feet. He was drenched in his own blood. His white shirt was shredded and stained a deep, horrifying crimson. But he was whole. He rolled his shoulders, a gesture so casual it was obscene, and a series of loud cracks echoed as his bones settled back into their proper alignment. He took a deep breath, the first with his newly regenerated lungs. He looked at the stunned, terrified students. He gave them a look that was meant to be reassuring, though on his blood-soaked face it was monstrous. Then he turned his attention to the utterly dumbfounded villains. His eyes, glowing with a faint, internal emerald light, settled on the slack-jawed Shigaraki. He spoke, his voice perfectly calm, with a slight dry rasp from his newly reformed throat. "That's a new one," Izuku said, a hint of genuine, academic curiosity in his tone. He flexed the fingers on his left hand, watching them work. He hits hard. The entire reality of the situation shattered and reformed around that single, impossible statement. This wasn't a hero. This wasn't a teacher. This was something else entirely. Something ancient and unbreakable. Shigaraki took a step back, a genuine tremor of fear running through him. What? What are you? You're a cheat. You're a bugged character. That's not a quirk. No ma. Kill him. Tear him to shreds. Rip off his head. He can't come back from that. He shrieked, his voice pitching high with panic and rage. The Nomu, obeying the hysterical command, charged again. This time, Izuku didn't bother with a graceful parry. He met the charge head-on. The Nomu swung, and Izuku raised his arm to block. The blow landed with the sound of a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. Izuku's arm was shattered, bent back at a horrifying, unnatural angle, but he didn't move. He absorbed the full force of the blow, his feet grinding against the stone but not giving an inch. And as the gnome reared back for another strike, its creator and its victims watched in abject horror as the bones in Izuku's arm audibly snapped back into place, the limb straightening itself out in less than a second. "It seems you're right," Izuku said, his voice still level. He looked at his newly healed arm. "You can't hurt me." The battle, if it could be called that, began anew. But it was no longer a fight. It was a stalemate enacted as a brutal spectacle. The Noma was an engine of pure, mindless force. It attacked with a relentless barrage of blows, each one capable of leveling a building. And Izuku stood before it, an immovable object. He didn't try to win, he couldn't. His staff was useless against the creature's body. His physical strikes did nothing, so he endured. He became a living shield. He parried, he blocked, he redirected. When a blow was too strong to block, he took it. The students watched, frozen in a state between terror and awe, as their history teacher was systematically, repeatedly destroyed, only to reform himself moments later. A punch that should have caved in his chest resulted in a sickening crunch, followed by the sight of his ribs knitting themselves back together under his torn shirt. A kick that snapped his leg in two was followed by Izuku calmly stamping his foot to reset the bone, which had already healed. He used the Noma's wild swings to his advantage, positioning himself so that every missed punch struck the ground, sending shockwaves through the plaza and keeping the villains off balance. He was not fighting the Noma. He was containing it. He was a cage made of flesh and bone and an unbreakable will, and he was holding the monster in place, protecting Aizawa's unconscious form, and keeping it far, far away from the children. "Why won't you die?" Shigaraki screamed, clawing at his neck so hard he drew blood. "This isn't fair. It's not fair. He's cheating." Izuku ignored him. His focus was absolute. Every regenerated cell, every mended bone, was a testament to his eternal burden. This pain was familiar. He had felt worse. He had regenerated from immolation, from dismemberment, from being crushed under rubble. This monster's strength was immense, but it was finite. His own endurance was not. He was a wall. And the wall would not fall. He didn't know how long he held the line. Seconds bled into minutes. The pattern was hypnotic: destruction, regeneration, defiance. He was buying time. Time for the other heroes. Time for a symbol. And then, he heard it. The massive doors to the USJ, the ones he and Aizawa had stormed through what felt like a lifetime ago, were blasted off their hinges, exploding inward in a shower of metal and dust. Standing there, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, was a colossal figure. He was not smiling. His face, etched with shadows, was a mask of pure, incandescent rage. All might had arrived. The atmosphere in the dome shifted instantly. The low-level thugs, who had been watching Izuku's horrific battle with a mixture of fear and confusion, now felt a primal, instinctual terror. Shigaraki's hysterical rage suddenly morphed into a wild, joyous glee. Yes. The final boss has appeared. Izuku felt the Noma's relentless assault pause as the creature turned to face the new, greater threat. He allowed himself a single, deep breath. His body ached with the ghost pain of 1,000 fatal wounds, but a profound sense of relief washed over him. The cavalry was here. His friend was here. He had done his job. He had held the line. He took a step back, lowering his staff, a battered, blood-soaked guardian stepping aside to let the god of war take the field. The sterile, antiseptic scent of the infirmary clung to Izuku like a shroud. He had refused a private room, sitting instead on a standard issue cot while the UA medical staff buzzed around him, their faces a mixture of professional calm and barely concealed awe. They had found no injuries. Not a scratch, not a bruise. Only a shredded, blood-caked shirt and a history teacher who looked as though he just witnessed the end of the world. He had politely declined their offers of sedatives and trauma counseling, his stillness more unnerving than any outburst would have been. Tashinori Yagi stood by the door, a fragile scarecrow in a suit, his body trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline and profound relief. He had watched from the command center as Izuku was torn in half. He had felt his own heart stop, a cold, final dread seizing him. Then he had watched the impossible, a miracle of biology, and that he knew was no quirk, but something far older, far more fundamental. He had seen Izuku sacrifice by him the precious seconds he needed to arrive, to become All Might, to be the symbol. The victory over the Noma felt hollow, tainted by the horrifying price his oldest friend had been willing to pay. Finally, after a perfunctory checkup that confirmed the impossible, Izuku rose. He had been given a simple black t-shirt and a fresh pair of trousers. The change of clothes did little to wipe the haunted look from his eyes. He walked towards Toshinori, his gait even, the slight, almost imperceptible limp from his youth momentarily forgotten. "Let's go, Toshi," Izuku said, his voice a low murmur. "Nizu is waiting." The walk to the principal's office was a silent procession. The usual boisterous energy of UA's halls was gone, replaced by the grim hum of a facility on high alert. Security guards in tactical gear patrolled the corridors, their faces tense. Teachers spoke in hushed, worried tones. Every eye that fell upon Izuku was filled with a new kind of question. The whispers followed them. The history teacher tore him in half, got back up. Izuku ignored them. He was used to being an anomaly. He had been one for more than 150 years. Toshinori, however, felt a protective instinct flare. He wanted to shield his friend from the stares, from the whispers. But as he looked at Izuku's calm, resolute profile, he realized it was a futile gesture. You couldn't shield a mountain from the wind. They reached the top floor, the door to Principal Nizu's office. It was a place of quiet power, a sanctuary of intellect high above the rest of the school. The door slid open before they reached it. Nizu sat behind his large, polished desk, a small, white-furred figure silhouetted against the panoramic window that displayed the sprawling cityscape. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in hues of orange and bruised purple. On a small table to the side, a chessboard was set mid-game. Nizu, as always, was playing both sides. A steaming tea set was already laid out on the low table in front of the sofa. "Gentlemen," Nizu said, his voice crisp and clear, betraying no panic. He hopped down from his chair. "Please sit. The worst is over, for now. The authorities are processing the villains. Aizawa and 13 are in stable condition, and the students are accounted for, albeit shaken. A commendable outcome, considering." Toshinori collapsed onto the sofa, the last of his strength leaving him. Izuku sat beside him, his posture still perfectly straight, an unmoving pillar of support. He poured a cup of chamomile tea and handed it to Toshinori, whose hands were shaking too much to do it himself. For himself, Izuku poured a cup of strong black Earl Grey. Nizu observed them for a moment, his beady black eyes missing nothing. He noted Toshinori's utter depletion and Izuku's profound, soul-deep weariness, a state he recognized as the Sentinel's default. "The Nomu," Nizu began, getting straight to the point as he took his own seat. "Analysis suggests multiple quirks forcibly combined. Shock absorption, super regeneration, and a strength profile designed specifically to match yours at 100%, Toshinori. A creature designed solely to kill the symbol of peace." He paused, his gaze landing squarely on Izuku. "And it failed. Because it encountered something it was not designed for. Something All for One could not have predicted." Toshinori looked at Izuku, his expression a mixture of awe and horror. "Izuku, what I saw, what everyone saw." Izuku took a slow, deliberate sip of his tea. The warmth was grounding. He set the cup down with a soft click. "It is time," he said, not to Toshinori, but more to the room, to history itself. "It is time you knew the whole truth, Toshi. Not just the pieces I have shared." He looked at Nizu, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Permission granted. The secret is now a necessity." Izuku leaned back against the sofa, his emerald eyes becoming unfocused as he let the walls of the present dissolve, allowing the vast, roaring ocean of his memory to rise to the surface. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he began, his voice taking on a distant, narrative quality, the same one he used when teaching his most vivid lessons. "I was born in 1899. I was a soldier in the Great War." Toshinori choked on his tea, sputtering. He stared at Izuku, his mind refusing to process the words. 1899? The Great War? It was impossible. A joke. But the look on Izuku's face was anything but funny. It was the look of a man reciting his own obituary. Flashback start. "The world is mud and rain. The year is 1915. A boy who is not yet a man, a boy of 15 who lied about his age to serve his country, huddles in a trench near the Somme. He is Izuku Midoriya. His face is thin, his eyes wide with a mixture of patriotic fervor and abject terror. The air smells of wet earth, cordite, and the metallic tang of blood. He doesn't have a quirk. The word doesn't even exist yet. He is just a boy with a rifle, told to fight for an emperor he has never seen. The whistle blows. A shrill, piercing command to climb out of the relative safety of the trench and charge into the meat grinder of no man's land. He scrambles over the top, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The noise is a physical wall, machine guns, artillery, the screams of men. He doesn't see where it comes from. He doesn't feel it, at first. There's just a sudden, sharp tug in his chest, a warmth that spreads with impossible speed. He looks down. A jagged, wicked piece of shrapnel, hot and oily, is embedded in his sternum. He stumbles. The world tilts. The gray, smoke-filled sky rushes up to meet him. His last thought is not of glory, or of his emperor, but of his mother's face. The world is cold and dark. And silent. The silence is the first thing he notices. He is lying on a hard, cold slab. The air is frigid and smells of formaldehyde. He opens his eyes. He is in a makeshift morgue, a tent filled with canvas-shrouded bodies. His body. He was one of them. He sits up. The canvas falls away. His uniform is caked in mud and dried blood, but the hole in his chest is gone. There's no wound. No scar. Only a faint phantom ache. He looks at his hands, turning them over and over. They are his hands. He is alive. But he was dead. He is sure of it. Panic, cold and sharp, lances through him. He scrambles off the slab, stumbling over the bodies of his comrades. He rips the tent flap open and falls out into the muddy, desolate camp. A medical orderly sees him and screams, dropping a tray of instruments. The man points a trembling finger at him, his face white with terror. Ghost. You're dead. I saw them carry you in myself. That was the first time. The first death. The first lonely, terrifying resurrection. Flashback end. Izuku's voice in Nisa's office was a low, somber whisper. They thought I was a spirit, a demon. I was ostracized, feared. I had no choice but to desert. I learned my nature the hard way. Hunger, thirst, disease, they could weaken me, but they could not kill me. A broken bone would mend in hours. A cut would close in minutes. I stopped aging the day I turned 15, the day I first died. My body is locked in that state, perpetually repairing itself to its prime. My quirk, if you can call it that, is true immortality. I cannot be killed. I simply endure. Tashinori stared, speechless. The scars Izuku carried, the weariness in his eyes, the impossible calm in the face of death, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. His friend wasn't just an old soul, he was the oldest soul. I wandered for decades, Izuku continued, his gaze distant. A ghost in my own world. I watched empires fall and new nations rise. I saw the dawn of the automobile, the airplane, the atomic bomb. I lived 1,000 different lives under 1,000 different names. A dockworker, a librarian, a medic. Always moving on before people noticed I didn't age. I was utterly, completely alone. He looked at Tashinori, a flicker of that ancient loneliness in his eyes. And then, the glowing baby was born in Qingqing. The world panicked. They saw chaos, the breakdown of society. I saw something else. I saw a promise. The promise that I would no longer be the only one who was different. Flashback start. The city is a kaleidoscope of chaos. It is the turbulent era. A man made of living crystal is robbing a store. A woman is screaming as uncontrollable pink energy arcs from her hands. The air crackles with fear and ozone. The police are useless, their bullets ineffective, their tactics obsolete. Izuku, who now looks like a young man in his late 20s but carries the weight of 80 years, stands in the shadows of an alleyway. He is watching a family cowering as a thug with rock-like fists threatens them. The thug is laughing, enjoying their terror. For decades, Izuku has hidden. He has observed. He has survived. But something inside him, the ghost of the 15-year-old boy who wanted to protect people, stirs. He is no longer afraid of being a monster. The world is full of monsters now. Maybe it needs one to fight back. He steps out of the alley. He wears simple, durable work clothes, his face obscured by a cheap cloth mask. The thug turns. Get lost, old man, or you're next. The thug throws a punch. Izuku doesn't move. The rock fist connects with his jaw with a sickening crack. Izuku's head snaps to the side. He tastes blood. The bone is broken. He turns his head back, the jaw audibly resetting itself into place. He spits a broken tooth onto the pavement. The thug's eyes go wide with shock. Izuku moves, a blur of motion honed by decades of staying alive. He doesn't punch. He strikes with precision. A palm heel to the man's nose, a sharp kick to the side of his knee. A disabling jab to the brachial plexus. The thug crumples, screaming in pain but alive. Izuku helps the terrified family to their feet and melts back into the shadows before anyone can get a good look at him. It wasn't a choice to be a hero. It was a pragmatic solution to a problem. People were dying. He could stop it. So he did. He became a whisper, a rumor. The Green Ghost. A vigilante who couldn't be killed, who fought not for glory, but for order in a world that had none. Flashback end. I fought for years as a vigilante, Izuku said, his voice flat. I wasn't the only one. There were others. Brave men and women trying to hold the world together. Most of them died. But there was one man, a man who was building an empire in the shadows, collecting quirks, preying on the weak. A man who called himself All for One. At the mention of the name, the atmosphere in the room grew cold. Toshinori's hands clenched into fists. He had a brother, Izuku said softly, and his expression changed. The hardness softened, replaced by a profound, familiar grief. His name was Yoichi. He was sickly, frail, but his spirit was a supernova. He believed in helping others, in resisting his brother's tyranny. All for One saw this as weakness. In a twisted attempt to make him stronger, he forced a quirk upon him, a useless stockpiling quirk. Izuku closed his eyes, the memory as clear as yesterday. Flashback start. The room is small, hidden in the basement of a crumbling library. It smells of old books and disinfectant. A young man, pale and gaunt, lies on a cot, racked by a coughing fit. This is Yoichi Shigaraki. His body is weak, but his eyes burn with a fierce, defiant light. Izuku, wearing the simple fatigues of his green ghost persona, kneels beside him, changing a damp cloth on his forehead. He had found Yoichi after he escaped his brother, helping him hide, becoming his friend and protector. He doesn't understand, Yoichi whispers, his voice hoarse. He thinks taking things, controlling everything, is strength. But true strength, it's in giving. In passing something on. Yoichi looks at Izuku, his eyes filled with a desperate, brilliant idea. The quirk he gave me, it's not useless. It has one other, secret property. It can be passed on. It merges with my own innate quirk, and it carries the will of its user. The will to resist him. Izuku listens, his ancient heart aching for the dying young man before him. He sees the hope in Yoichi's eyes, a fragile flame in a world of darkness. I don't have long, Izuku, Yoichi says, grabbing his hand. His grip is surprisingly strong. But this power, it can grow. It can become a sword to fight him. A shield to protect everyone. I can't give it to you. Your own quirk, your nature, it is too absolute. It would not merge. But there will be others. Someone must carry this torch. Izuku looks at the dying man, at the first true hero, and feels the weight of a new purpose settling on his eternal shoulders. He is the constant. The unmoving stone in the river of time. He cannot carry the torch himself, but he can guard the path for those who do. I will, Izuku says, his voice thick with emotion. I swear it, Yoichi. I cannot take your burden. But I can stand by those who carry it. I will be their guardian. Their confidant. Their memory. I will watch over them, all of them, until the very end. I will see your will done. A tear traces a path down Yoichi's pale cheek. He smiles, a brilliant, hopeful smile that lights up the dark room. Thank you, my friend. My sentinel, flashback and Izuku opened his eyes. A single, solitary tear escaped and traced a path down his own cheek. He didn't bother to wipe it away. And I did, he whispered, his voice cracking with the grief of a dozen lifetimes. He finally looked directly at Toshinori, his gaze piercing, filled with a century of shared secrets. I was there when Yoichi gave one for all to the second user, a grim soldier who reminded me of myself. I advised the third, a clever rogue who first learned to harness its kinetic energy. I sparred with the fourth, who died of old age, the only one to do so. I stood with the fifth, the sixth. His voice hitched. I trained Nana Shimura. Toshinori's breath caught in his throat. He had known, logically, that Izuku and Nana were friends, colleagues at UA in its early days. But he had never understood the depth, the true context. I held her when she wept after sending her son away, a decision that tore her apart but one she thought would keep him safe from him. Izuku's voice was raw with pain. I was the one who found her body after her last fight. I buried her myself. The room was utterly silent, save for Toshinori's ragged breathing. The pieces of his life, of the sacred duty he had inherited, were being rearranged into a new, staggering mosaic. Izuku wasn't just his friend, his mentor, his colleague. He was the secret keeper. The eternal guardian of the flame. The living history of One for All. I have known and advised every single user of One for All, Toshi, Izuku stated, the full weight of his vow laid bare. From Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, to you, Toshinori Yagi, the eighth and greatest. I am the sentinel. That is my promise. That is my burden. Toshinori was shaking, not from weakness, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of the revelation. He looked at Izuku, at the man he had known for decades, and saw him for the first time. He saw the 15-year-old boy dying in the mud. He saw the lonely ghost wandering through a changing world. He saw the grim vigilante fighting in the shadows. He saw the grieving friend who had buried 7 of his predecessors. 7 of his friends, all this time. Toshinori whispered, his voice filled with a bottomless well of awe and sorrow. All this time, you've carried this alone. Not alone, Izuku corrected softly, placing a steadying hand on Toshinori's shoulder. The same gesture from before, but now it carried the weight of 150 years of loyalty. I was with them, and I am with you. He looked at Nizu, who had been listening with rapt, unblinking attention. And now you both know. You know what we are up against. Not just a villain, but a personal nemesis who has haunted my entire existence. And in Tamura Shigaraki, he has found a new, terrible vessel for his hatred. Nizu finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. This changes the strategic landscape entirely. Your existence, Izuku, is the single greatest asset this institution has. An unkillable guardian with over a century of combat experience, and intimate knowledge of our greatest enemy. I am a wall, Izuku said, the weariness returning full force. A wall that can be battered, broken, and torn down, only to rebuild itself. But a wall cannot win a war. It can only hold the line. It can only buy time. He looked at Toshinori, his expression softening. It needs a sword. It needs a symbol. Your time as that symbol may be ending, Toshi, but the fire of One for All is not extinguished. He rose and walked to the panoramic window, looking out at the city lights that were now twinkling to life against the encroaching darkness. A city he had helped build, a peace he had bled for, over and over again. I have buried 7 of my dearest friends, Toshi. Each one a brighter star than the last, he said, his back to them. I will not bury an 8th. We will face this together. We will prepare the next generation. And we will end this. For Yoichi. For Nana. For all of them. He stood there, a solitary figure against the vastness of the night, a man out of time, bound by an ancient promise. The past was his burden. The present was his battlefield, and in the looming shadow of Tamura Shigaraki, he could see the terrible shape of the future he had to face, a future he would no longer have to face alone. The Sentinel's watch continued, but for the first time in a long while, he did not feel entirely alone in the darkness. The Yui Sports Festival was a spectacle of joyous, chaotic noise. It was the roar of the crowd, a single, unified beast of 100,000 voices. It was the explosive commentary of present mic, turning every student's move into a legendary feat. It was the flash of cameras, the vibrant colors of school banners, and the almost tangible scent of takoyaki and grilled squid hanging in the air. For Japan, it was a national holiday, a celebration of the bright future of heroism. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a symphony of ghosts. He sat not in the general teacher's box, but in a private, soundproofed observation room high in the stadium rafters, a shadowy perch known only to a select few. The room was Spartan, a bank of monitors displaying every conceivable camera angle, a communications console, and a large, one-way window that offered a god's eye view of the central arena. Beside him sat Toshinori Yagi, looking even more frail and skeletal than usual, a thick blanket draped over his lap despite the room's comfortable temperature. Niza sat on a custom-built high chair, his paws steepled, his beady eyes darting between the monitors with an unnerving intelligence. This was the new triumvirate of Yue's leadership. The symbol, the sentinel, and the strategist. Down below, the first-year obstacle course was in full swing. On the main monitor, Shoto Todoroki had taken a commanding lead, his ice quirk creating a massive, glittering glacier that instantly froze the track and immobilized dozens of his competitors. Impressive, Nizu chirped, taking a sip of tea. The raw power is undeniable. He exhibits a level of control that is rare for his age. A fine product of Endeavor's selective breeding program, Toshinori grunted, a flicker of distaste on his face. He's powerful, yes, but cold. He relies entirely on his ice. He hasn't used his fire once. Izuku watched the screen, his expression unreadable. He wasn't seeing just a boy with a powerful quirk. He was seeing patterns, echoes of history repeating itself. He's fighting a war on two fronts, Izuku said, his voice a low murmur that cut through present mixed frantic yelling from the stadium speakers. One against his opponents, and another, more important one against himself. That ice, it's a shield as much as a weapon. A declaration of defiance. Defiance against his father, Toshinori sighed. Against his lineage, Izuku corrected softly. It's a subtle but important difference. A father can be defied. A lineage is a current in the river of time. You can try to swim against it, but it will always be there, pulling at you. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Todoroki's determined, angry face on the screen. I've seen it before. Legacies can be crowns or they can be shackles. A man I knew, back in the early days, had a quirk that let him manipulate metals. His father was a notorious villain who used a similar power to build weapons. The son spent his entire life only ever using his quirk to create sculptures and bridges. He was a brilliant hero, but he was only ever half of what he could have been, because he was terrified of becoming his father. Niza and Toshinori were silent, absorbing the weight of the casual, century-old anecdote. To them, the sports festival was about scouting the next generation. To Izuku, it was a diagnostic. He was watching these children forge their own chains or break free from them. His gaze shifted to another monitor, this one focused on Katsuki Bakugo, who was using his explosions to propel himself through the air, bypassing the ice with raw, unadulterated aggression. And then there is the opposite, Izuku murmured. Power without a past to anchor it. Pure, untamed ambition. Bakugo doesn't fight his opponents. He fights the entire world. He sees every other person as an obstacle between him and the number one spot. His drive is incredible, Toshinori admitted. If it could be channeled. A hurricane is also incredible, Toshi, Izuku countered. But you don't build a house in the middle of one. You guide it, or you get out of its way. We have to teach him to be the eye of his own storm, to find that point of stillness in the middle of all that rage. If he can't, he'll burn himself out. Or worse. The festival progressed. The cavalry battle was a masterclass in strategy and chaos. Izuku watched as his students formed alliances, betrayed each other, and adapted on the fly. He saw Tokoyami's dark shadow, a powerful but volatile quirk, and was reminded of a vigilante from the 60s who had a similar living shadow quirk and was eventually consumed by it when his control slipped, during a moment of profound grief. He saw Momo Yaoyorosa's brilliant creation quirk and remembered the first time Yue had a student with such a versatile power, and the immense pressure she was under to always create the perfect solution, leading to a crippling crisis of confidence. Each student was a story, and for Izuku, each story had a precedent. He was a living library of successes and failures, a ghost whispering warnings only he could hear. The final one-on-one tournament bracket was announced. The tension in the stadium ratcheted up. The first match of note was Shoto Todoroki versus Hitoshi Shinso from the general course. Shinso's brainwashing quirk was potent, a perfect trap. A dangerous quirk in the wrong hands, Nisa commented, observing Shinso's psychological baiting. All quirks are dangerous in the wrong hands, Izuku replied quietly. Shinso's is just more honest about it. It bypasses the physical and attacks the will. All for one would have coveted a quirk like that. The casual mention of his ancient nemesis sent a chill through the room. Todoroki, baited by a comment about his father, was about to reply and fall into the trap. But then, at the last second, he unleashed a massive, involuntary wave of ice, breaking Shinso's control through a reflexive burst of overwhelming power. Toshinori let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He almost fell for it. Izuku didn't look relieved. He looked concerned. He didn't break free through force of will, he observed. He broke free because his hatred for his father is so ingrained that it acts as a secondary consciousness. He's not in control. His trauma is. That is not a stable foundation for a hero. He rose from his chair. I'll be back, he said, walking towards the door. Where are you going? Toshinori asked. To have a word with a young man about the nature of shackles, Izuku said without looking back. He navigated the private corridors of the stadium with a familiar ease. He had walked these same halls during the inaugural UA Sports Festival, a much smaller, more violent affair held in a repurposed boxing arena. He found Shoto Todoroki in one of the designated waiting rooms, a stark, white box of a room. The air was cold, a testament to the boy's agitated state, a thin layer of frost creeping up the walls. Shoto was sitting on a bench, his left hand clenched, steam rising from it in the chilled air. He was radiating a conflicting aura of icy calm and volcanic rage. He looked up as Izuku entered, his heterochromatic eyes wary. Mr. Midoriya. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Izuku didn't approach him like a teacher or an authority figure. He simply walked to the opposite wall and leaned against it, his arms crossed. He didn't speak for a long moment, letting the silence stretch, forcing the boy to acknowledge his presence on his own terms. What do you want? Shoto finally asked, his tone clipped. I wanted to talk to you about fire, Izuku said, his voice soft, almost conversational. Shoto's entire body went rigid. His jaw clenched. I will not use it. I will win this festival and I will reject him completely, using only my mother's power. A noble goal, Izuku acknowledged, nodding slowly. And a foolish one. Shoto's head snapped up, a flash of anger in his eyes. You don't understand. Oh, I think I do, Izuku said, his own eyes holding a depth of understanding that was unsettling. I understand what it's like to have something inside you that you believe is a curse. A part of you that you want to deny, to lock away, because it's tied to pain, to a history you want no part of. He pushed off the wall and took a few slow steps closer. I am going to tell you a story, Shoto. Not as your teacher, but as someone who has seen a great deal of history. There was a musician, a pianist, one of the greatest of his generation. This was a long time ago. His father was a tyrant, a monster who beat him, who forced him to practice until his fingers bled, all to live out the father's own failed ambitions. The boy grew to hate the piano. He saw it as the instrument of his torment, the symbol of his father's control. Shoto was listening now, his anger momentarily forgotten, captivated by the quiet intensity in Izuku's voice. When his father died, the boy swore he would never touch a piano again. For years he didn't. He tried to be a painter, a writer, anything else. But he was miserable. The music was still inside him, a phantom limb aching for expression. One day, an old friend told him something I am now telling you. The piano did not hurt you. Your father did. The music is not his, it is yours. You can either let him hold it hostage forever, or you can take it back. Izuku stopped a few feet from him. His gaze was not pitying. It was fiercely direct. Your fire is not Endeavor's. It is yours. It is half of who you are. By refusing to use it, you are not rejecting him. You are letting him win. You are letting his influence dictate the terms of your life, even in defiance. His shadow is still controlling your actions. You are shackling yourself with his chains. He gestured with his chin towards Shoto's left side. That fire is your music, Shoto. He may have been the one to force it upon you, but you are the one who decides the song you will play. Take it back, not for him. Not for anyone else. For yourself. Become the hero you want to be, with all the power you possess. That is the only true way to be free of him. Izuku turned and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. Your legacies, your quirks, your past, they are not who you are. They are simply the tools you are given. The choice of what you build, or what you burn, belongs only to you. He left without another word, leaving Shoto alone in the cold room, the echo of his words hanging in the air like the lingering notes of a powerful symphony. Back in the observation room, Toshinori looked at Izuku with questioning eyes. Izuku simply shook his head and retook his seat. The seed is planted. Whether it grows is up to him. The next match was a brutal, emotional affair, Ochiko Uraraka vs Katsuki Bakugo. From the moment it began, it was clear Uraraka was hopelessly outmatched in terms of raw power. But she refused to give up. Again and again, she charged, and again, Bakugo blasted her back. The crowd began to boo, misinterpreting Bakugo's relentless assault as bullying. He's not toying with her, Izuku said, his voice sharp, silencing a concerned comment from Toshinori. Look at his eyes. He's acknowledging her. He's treating her as a genuine threat. He is giving her the respect of his full, undivided power. Anything less would be the real insult. Uraraka, battered and bruised, finally revealed her strategy. A meteor shower of debris she had been floating while Bakugo was focused on her. It was a brilliant, desperate gamble. For a moment it seemed like it might work. But Bakugo, with a single, colossal explosion, obliterated the entire shower and sent a concussive blast that knocked Uraraka out of the ring for good. She lay on the ground, defeated but defiant. The stadium was quiet for a moment, then erupted in thunderous applause for her tenacity. In the quiet of the observation room, Izuku was silent. His gaze was distant, his face etched with a familiar, poignant sadness. Flashback start. The sun is setting over a makeshift training ground behind the original, much smaller UA building. The year is 1978. A young Izuku, looking exactly as he does now, spars with a vibrant, fiercely alive young woman with a constellation of moles on her face and a smile that could light up the darkest room. Her name is Nana Shimura, the 7th user of One for All. She is fast, her float quirk making her an unpredictable, aerial opponent. But Izuku is faster. He moves with a preternatural grace, his staff a blur, always there to block her strikes, to gently parry her, forcing her to adapt, to think. You rely too much on your power, Nana, he says, his voice patient as he effortlessly deflects a dive kick. One for All is a sledgehammer. But sometimes you need a scalpel. Think. What is my weakness? Nana lands, breathing hard, a frustrated but determined glint in her eyes. You don't have any weaknesses, you immortal old fossil, she says, half joking. Everyone has a weakness, he counters with a small smile. Mine is that I am one person. I cannot be everywhere at once. Use your environment. Use misdirection. Don't just try to overpower me. Outthink me. She looks around the training ground, at the scattered debris from their sparring. A slow, brilliant smile spreads across her face. An idea. It's a crazy, desperate idea, much like the one Uraraka would have decades later. The memory shifts. He is holding her as she weeps, her body trembling after signing the papers to give her son, Kotaro, away. The pain in her is a physical thing, a wound deeper than any he had ever suffered. It's the only way, Izuku, she whispers, her voice raw. To keep him safe from him. He can't have a normal life if he's tied to me, to this. She clutches her chest, where the fire of One for All burns. Promise me you'll watch over my legacy. Promise me you'll watch over Toshi. He's a good kid, but he's so reckless. I promise, Nana, he had said, his own heart aching. Always. Flashback end. She would have been proud of that girl, Izuku said aloud, his voice thick with unshed tears. He turned to Tashinori, whose own eyes were glistening with moisture at the memory of his master. She had the same unbreakable spirit. The same fire. Nana would have been proud of you too, Toshi. You've become everything she hoped you would be. Tashinori couldn't speak. He just nodded, wiping at his eyes, the weight of his master's legacy and his friend's eternal vigil pressing down on him. The final match arrived, Shoto Todoroki versus Katsuki Bakugo. It was the showdown everyone had been waiting for. The immovable object of ice versus the unstoppable force of explosions. The fight began, and just as before, Todoroki only used his ice. He was powerful, creating massive glaciers and walls of frost, but Bakugo was a force of nature, blasting through, over, and around every obstacle. He was a dervish of explosive energy, pushing Todoroki onto the defensive. Come on! Bakugo roared, dodging a spike of ice. Is that all you've got? How do you expect to be number one with that half-assed power? Fight me! Fight me with everything you've got! In the stands, Endeavor screamed his own encouragement, a toxic cloud of ambition, and then, something shifted. Bakugo's taunts, Endeavor's roar, they were all just noise. But a quieter voice echoed in Shoto's mind. The music is not his. It is yours. Take it back. He looked at Bakugo, who was fighting him with everything, acknowledging him as a true rival. He looked at his own left hand. And he made a choice. Flame. A torrent of brilliant orange fire erupted from his left side, so hot and so sudden it melted the entire field of ice in an instant. The crowd gasped. The temperature in the stadium skyrocketed. Shoto stood there, wreathed in a maelstrom of ice and fire, a perfect, beautiful balance of two immense powers. A look of shock, and then a fierce, liberated joy, was on his face. He had taken it back. Yes! Bakugo screamed, a wild, ecstatic grin spreading across his face. That's it! Now we're talking! The two boys prepared for one final, cataclysmic attack. A massive explosion from Bakugo. A terrifying inferno from Todoroki. They launched themselves at each other. The collision would have been devastating, but at the last second, Cementos and Midnight intervened, creating walls and releasing sleep gas to stop the fight before they killed each other. Bakugo's final, devastating blast knocked Todoroki out of bounds, making him the winner, but the victory felt hollow. Bakugo was furious. He hadn't won against Todoroki at his absolute best. Later, on the podium, the scene was almost pathetic. Todoroki stood stoically, accepting his silver medal, and Bakugo had to be chained to the first-place platform, muzzled like a rabid animal, roaring in incoherent rage. He had won the festival, but he had been denied the victory he craved, an undeniable, absolute triumph over his rival at his peak. All Might, in his grand hero form, sweat dropped as he tried to award the medal. In the observation room, Tashinori sighed, his shoulders slumping. That boy, he's going to be the death of me. Izuku wasn't watching All Might. He was watching Bakugo. His expression was not one of anger or disappointment. It was one of deep, analytical, and profound concern, the look a doctor might give to a patient with a terminal but treatable illness. He walked over to the communications console and patched himself into Aizawa's private earpiece. Aizawa was down on the field, looking exhausted and annoyed. Shota, Izuku's voice came through, calm and quiet. Midoriya, Aizawa grunted. Enjoying the show? Look at him, Shota, Izuku said, his voice serious. Look at Bakugo. What do you see? Aizawa glanced at the furiously struggling boy on the podium. I see a problem child with an ego the size of this stadium and a victory he can't accept. I see power without purpose, Izuku corrected grimly. His only goal is to be the best. It's an empty, abstract concept. It has no foundation in helping others, in protecting society, in justice. It is pure, selfish ambition. And power without a purpose beyond the self, it is the most dangerous thing in the world. He paused, and his next words were laced with a chilling, ancient venom. It is all for one's favorite tool. He finds those fires of ambition and he pours gasoline on them. He offers them purpose. His purpose. We cannot let that happen to this boy. Aizawa went still. The comparison was terrifying, and he knew Izuku would not make it lightly. He looked at Bakugo again, not as a problematic student, but as a potential pawn in a century-long war. He saw the raw power, the explosive rage, the desperate need for validation. And for the first time, he felt a genuine spike of fear for the boy. Izuku switched off the comms. The festival was over. The crowds were cheering. The sponsors were happy. But in the quiet observation room, the sentinel saw only the ghosts of the past and the storm clouds of the future, gathering around his volatile, brilliant, and terrifyingly vulnerable students. The games were over. The war was just beginning. The week following the sports festival was a whirlwind of recruitment offers and media hype. The students of Class 1A were thrust into the limelight, choosing their internships, taking their first tentative steps into the world of professional heroics. There was a palpable energy in the school, an air of bright-eyed optimism. But outside the hallowed walls of UA, a shadow was lengthening. It had started as whispers on the hero forums, fragmented police reports, and hushed conversations in underground broker circles. A figure known only as the hero killer was targeting pros. He didn't kill for money or fame. He killed for ideology. He was leaving a trail of bodies across Japan, each one accompanied by a chilling message: the fallen were fakes, unworthy of the title of hero. Izuku Midoriya followed the news not with the shock of his colleagues, but with a grim, weary sense of déjà vu. He sat in his Spartan office, the glow of a monitor illuminating the sharp planes of his face. On the screen were police files he'd acquired through Nizu, detailing the hero killer's attacks. The precision of the wounds, the choice of victims, heroes known more for their commercial endorsements than their rescue stats. The righteous, fanatical rhetoric attributed to him. It was all so terribly familiar. He closed his eyes, and the sterile white of the document on his screen was replaced by the grimy, rain-slicked cobblestones of a bygone era. Flashback start. The city is Osaka, circa 1962. The concept of the professional hero is in its infancy, a chaotic, unregulated mess. Men and women with powerful quirks are branding themselves as heroes, but many are little more than glorified mercenaries or extortionists, demanding protection fees from the very citizens they claim to serve. Rain falls in heavy, slate-gray sheets, turning the neon signs of the Dotonbori district into blurry, watercolor smears on the wet pavement. In a dark, narrow alleyway reeking of stale ramen and damp garbage, a man is being held against a brick wall. He is a small shop owner, his face pale with terror. Towering over him is a hulking figure who calls himself Diamond Fist, a so-called hero whose quirk allows him to coat his hands in an unbreakable crystalline substance. The fee is due, Tanaka-san, Diamond Fist sneers, his crystallized knuckles glinting in the dim light. Heroism isn't free. You want your shop to stay safe from unfortunate accidents, don't you? The shop owner trembles, holding out a small envelope of cash. It's all I have. Before Diamond Fist can snatch it, a voice, cold and quiet as the grave, cuts through the sound of the rain. That's far enough. Diamond Fist whirls around. Standing at the mouth of the alley is a figure clad in simple, dark green military surplus gear, his face obscured by a drab, functional gas mask and a deep hood. It is the Green Ghost, a phantom who has been systematically dismantling the corrupt power structures of the city for months. Izuku, beat it, freak, Diamond Fist growls, emboldened by his own power. This is official hero business. You are not a hero, Izuku states, his voice slightly distorted by the mask's respirator. You are a parasite. A sickness. And I am the cure. Diamond Fist roars and charges, his crystalline fist raised. Izuku doesn't meet the blow. He moves like water, flowing around the attack. His movements are devoid of any flourish, stripped down to pure, brutal efficiency. A quick, precise strike from his graphite staff shatters Diamond Fist's kneecap. The man screams, stumbling. Izuku follows through with a ruthless sequence of attacks. A jab to the throat to silence him. A disabling blow to the shoulder to render his quirk arm useless. A final, decisive strike to the temple that renders him unconscious. Izuku never killed. It was the one line he had drawn for himself in a world with no lines. Death was an end. It was absolution. What he delivered was consequence. He left the hero broken, bound, and humiliated for the underfunded police to find, along with the envelope of money returned to the shopkeeper and a small, handwritten note that simply read, "This is a fake." He wasn't a killer. But in those lawless days he had been a judge. And he had been a damn good one. Flashback end. Izuku opened his eyes, the memory fading but its emotional residue clinging to him. He looked at the profile on his screen. Kaizo Makaguro. Former aspiring hero. Dropped out. Preached an ideology of a return to true heroism on the streets. Then he vanished, only to resurface as the hero killer, Stain. "You're not me," Izuku whispered to the grainy photo on the screen. "You crossed the line. You chose death instead of justice." He understood Stain's rage. He had felt that same righteous fire himself, a deep, burning contempt for those who would profane the sacred concept of heroism. But where Izuku had sought to purge the system so it could grow stronger, Stain sought only to burn it all down. His ideology was a poisoned, twisted reflection of Izuku's own past, a dark mirror showing what he could have become if he had let his eternal weariness curdle into nihilism. The chime of an incoming message drew him from his reverie. It was from Nizu. A single line of text: Tensei Ida. Attacked in Hosu. Career-ending injuries. Suspect, hero killer. Izuku's blood ran cold. Tensei. Ingenium. A good hero. A good man. He had met him several times at official UA functions. And he was Tenya Ida's older brother. His mind immediately leaped to the inevitable conclusion. He pulled up the internship placements for Class 1A. His eyes scanned the list until he found it, a cold dread settling in his stomach like a block of ice. Student, Tenya Ida. Internship placement, Pro Hero Manual. Location, Hosu City. No, Izuku breathed. He knew that look in Tenya Ida's eyes. That unwavering, almost fanatical devotion to rules and righteousness. It was the same look Tensei had. It was the look of a man who would not, could not, let an injustice against his family go unanswered. He was going after Stain. A boy, barely a hero in training, was about to throw himself against a fanatical, seasoned killer. History was rhyming again, and the verse was a funeral dirge. Izuku stood up. The quiet, academic air of his office evaporated. He moved to the tall locker in the corner, the one that held his other life. He didn't hesitate. He pulled on the dark green, fire-retardant jacket. He picked up the scarred graphite staff. He wasn't Mr. Midoriya, the UA teacher anymore. He was the Sentinel, a ghost from the past answering a call in the present. He didn't bother with official channels. He didn't alert the other teachers. This wasn't a UA matter. This was personal. This was an echo of his own war, a specter from his past that he had to confront himself. He sent a single, encrypted message to Nizu's private terminal, taking personal leave. Hosu. Nizu would understand. Hosu City was burning. By the time Izuku arrived, slipping into the city limits like a phantom under the cover of the ensuing chaos, the situation had escalated dramatically. The League of Villains, in a coordinated attack almost certainly meant to draw attention away from something else, had unleashed 3 Nomu upon the city center. Pro-heroes were scrambling, overwhelmed by the sheer destructive power of the creatures. The city was a cacophony of sirens, explosions, and screams. Izuku ignored the Noma. He trusted the pros on site, including Endeavor, who had arrived with Todoroki, to handle the monsters. His target was different. The chaos was a smokescreen, and he knew what was hiding in the smoke. He moved through the back alleys, a ghost in the periphery. His senses, honed over a century of survival, were on high alert. He wasn't just looking, he was listening. He was feeling the vibrations in the pavement, smelling the air for the coppery tang of fresh blood, searching for the telltale signs of a very specific kind of fight. And then he heard it. Not the grand, concussive booms of the Noma fight, but the sharp, frantic clang of metal on metal, followed by a cry of pain. It came from a narrow, garbage-strewn alley, tucked away from the main thoroughfares. He melted into the shadows and approached, his footsteps making no sound. The scene that greeted him was grimly familiar, a tableau of vengeance and fanaticism he had seen countless times before. The pro-hero native was slumped against the wall, bleeding from dozens of shallow cuts. Tenya Ida was on the ground, his silver ingenium armor scarred and dented, a sword blade pinning his arm to the asphalt, and standing over them, his grotesque costume of bandages and blades making him look like a mummified demon, was the hero killer, Stain. Stain's tongue, unnaturally long and serpentine, darted out to lick the blood from his blade. Ida's body went rigid then limp. Paralyzed. You are weak, Stain rasped, his voice a dry, contemptuous hiss. Like your brother. You bear the name of a hero, but you are driven by personal vengeance. You are a fake. You are unworthy, and so you will die. He raised his katana, the jagged blade aimed at Ida's heart. He is not a fake, a new voice said, calm and cold as a winter night. He is a child. And you are a murderer. Stain froze, spinning around. Standing at the entrance to the alley, bathed in the hellish red glow of the distant fires, was Izuku. His face was hidden in the deep shadows of his hood, only the grim line of his mouth visible. He held his graphite staff loosely in one hand. Stain's eyes, visible through the slits in his mask, narrowed. He sensed no fear from this newcomer. Only an unnerving, absolute stillness. Another hero? I do not recognize your costume. Who are you? I am his teacher, Izuku said, taking a slow step forward. A teacher? Stain scoffed. Then you are responsible for this failed product. You fill their heads with dreams of fame and fortune instead of sacrifice. You are the root of the sickness, and you believe you're the cure, Izuku countered, his voice flat. He took another step, his presence dominating the narrow alley. Culling the unworthy. Purging the false heroes. A noble sentiment. I've heard it before. Stain tensed, recognizing the subtle mockery. Do not mock my conviction. This society is overgrown with fakes. I will prune the weeds so that true heroes may flourish. You're not pruning, Izuku said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You're salting the earth. You leave nothing behind but death and fear. Suddenly, a torrent of fire erupted at the mouth of the alley. Shoto Todoroki stood there, his left side ablaze, his face a mask of cold fury. Midoriya-sensei? What are you doing here? He asked, shocked to see his enigmatic teacher clad in strange combat gear. Then his eyes fell on the scene. Ida, Todoroki, stay back! Izuku commanded, not taking his eyes off Stain. This is not your fight. He attacked my friend. Shoto shot back, unleashing a wave of ice towards Stain. Stain dodged with a fluid, inhuman grace, leaping onto the alley wall. More children? Playing hero? You all lack the true spirit. The fight began. A chaotic, desperate melee in the cramped alley. Todoroki unleashed torrents of ice and fire, trying to keep Stain at a distance. But Stain was a master of his environment, using the walls to leap and bound, his movements erratic and unpredictable. Izuku watched for a split second, his mind a whirlwind of tactical analysis. Todoroki was powerful but reckless. Ida was paralyzed and vulnerable. Native was incapacitated. He was the only one who could control this situation. He moved. Stain lunged at Todoroki, a knife gleaming in his hand. Izuku intercepted him, his black staff a blur. The clang of his staff blocking Stain's katana was deafening in the narrow space. The force of the blow would have shattered a normal man's arm. Izuku didn't even flinch. Your opponent, Izuku said, his voice a low growl, is me. What followed was not a flashy battle of quirks. It was a brutal, intimate duel between two masters of combat. Stain was all frenetic, terrifying speed, his blades a whirlwind of death. Izuku was a rock, an immovable object of perfect defense and precise, punishing counters. He didn't use flashy moves. He used simple, efficient blocks, parries, and disarming strikes honed over a century of life-or-death combat. His staff seemed to be everywhere at once, a perfect black barrier against Stain's assault. Who are you? Stain snarled, his frustration growing. Every attack was blocked. Every feint was seen through. It was like fighting a statue that could move at the speed of thought. There was a weight, an age, to this man's fighting style that he had never encountered before. I am the man who did your job before you were born, Izuku replied, forcing Stain back with a powerful shove of his staff. And I did it without becoming a monster. This was the ideological clash made manifest. Stain fought with the desperate, frenzied passion of a zealot. Izuku fought with the cold, weary patience of a timeless guardian. For every one of Stain's arguments about the corruption of modern heroes, Izuku had a memory, a scar, a ghost to prove that the alternative, the lawless chaos Stain's actions would create, was infinitely worse. You think you're a judge? Izuku grunted, deflecting a thrown knife with a flick of his staff. You're just a serial killer with a thesaurus. You speak of All Might's spirit, of true heroism. I knew heroes who fought with nothing but their bare hands and a refusal to die, who held cities together with sheer grit when the world was falling apart. You spit on their memory every time you take a life. Stain roared, a sound of pure frustration, and lunged, his quirk-activating tongue darting out. Izuku, anticipating the move, stamped down hard on Stain's foot, pinning him for a fraction of a second. It was all the time he needed. He spun his staff, catching Stain's sword arm and twisting it with a sickening crunch of bone. Stain screamed, his katana clattering to the ground. In the same motion, Izuku slammed the butt of his staff into Stain's temple. Not hard enough to kill, but hard enough to send him staggering back dazed. It's over, Akaguro, Izuku said, his hood falling back in the struggle, revealing his face, young and determined, yet ancient and tired, to his students. But Stain was not finished. Even with a broken arm, his fanaticism gave him strength. He pulled another knife, preparing for a final, suicidal lunge. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the alley. A winged Nomu, one of the creatures from the main battle, swooped down, its talons extended. It ignored the heroes and snatched Izuku, its intended target unclear in the chaos. Sensei! Todoroki screamed. The Nomu soared into the sky, Izuku firmly in its grip. But Izuku wasn't panicking. As the creature carried him over the burning street, he saw his chance. Below, Stain was staggering out of the alley, his eyes on the flying monster. With a surge of strength, Izuku twisted in the Nomu's grip. He wasn't trying to break free. He angled his body and drove the end of his staff down, straight through the Nomu's exposed brain. The creature shrieked, its flight faltering. As it began to plummet, Izuku pushed off, letting go and dropping 20 feet to the street below. He landed in a crouch, his legs absorbing the impact with a faint groan. The dying Nomu crashed to the street nearby, twitching. And standing right in front of it, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated conviction, was Stain. The other pro-heroes, who had been fighting the Nomu, began to converge. Endeavor was there, his face a thunderous scowl. Gran Torino, who had been helping, zipped to a halt. Stay back! Stain roared, his voice carrying an unholy power. Despite his injuries, a broken arm, a concussion, multiple bruises, he stood tall. The fires of Hosu silhouetted him, making him seem larger than life. A broken rib had punctured a lung, and a trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. But it was his eyes. His eyes burned with a terrifying, incandescent light, a zealotry so pure it was almost a physical force. All of you, fakes! He bellowed, his voice echoing through the ruined street. The only one who is allowed to kill me is a true hero. The only one worthy is All Might. The sheer force of his will, of his killing intent, washed over the street. The pro-heroes, Endeavor included, froze in their tracks. The winged Nomu, in its death throes, went completely still. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. It was the purest, most undiluted display of conviction any of them had ever witnessed. It was the power of a man who believed in his cause so completely that reality itself seemed to bend to his will. Stain took one more step, his blade held aloft, before the punctured lung finally gave out. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed unconscious. Silence. The street was utterly silent. The pro-heroes, the students, they all stared at the fallen form of the hero killer, shaken to their very core by the force of his spirit. Only one person had not been frozen. Izuku Midoriya stood perfectly still, his staff held at his side. He had not flinched. He had not been intimidated. He had felt the wave of killing intent, the terrifying force of Stain's will, and it had washed over him like a gentle breeze, because he had stood in the presence of All for One. He had felt the crushing, soul-destroying weight of a will that had devoured thousands of others. Stain's fanaticism, as pure and as potent as it was but a flickering candle flame next to the black sun of all for one's ambition. He walked over to the unconscious form of Kaizo Makaguro. He looked down at the man who was a dark, twisted echo of his own past. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a profound, aching pity. "You were wrong," Izuku whispered, so quietly that only he could hear. "True heroism isn't about a glorious death. It's about the grim, thankless, unending work of living, of enduring, of holding the line, day after day." He looked up at his students. At Ida, now freed from the paralysis, being tended to by Todoroki. They were staring at him, their expressions a mixture of awe, confusion, and fear. They had seen their kind, unassuming history teacher become a warrior, a commander, and a ghost from a bygone era, all in the space of one night. The masquerade was over. The shadow of the vigilante had fallen over them, and things would never be the same.